something more. Let's bring in 3 members of Parliament to discuss that. Over semantics or something more. Let's bring in 3 members of Parliament to discuss that. From the foyer, we're joined by Liberal MP Arif Virani. He's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration. Marilyn Gladu is the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. And Sheila Malcolmson is the NDP's critic for the status of women and the Vice Chair of that committee. It's good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Marilyn Gladu, let me start with you. We've played an excerpt from the House today of Liberal MP Iqra Khalid reading out some of the hate comments she's received since she proposed the original motion to have the House condemn Islamophobia. There were comments attacking her as a woman and as a Muslim. Why do you think she's receiving those messages?
Well, you know, I think it's horrific that she did receive them. I received similar things against me from a religious point of view when I was running in my campaign. This is very common and totally unacceptable here in Canada. And that's part of the reason why we were bringing the motion we're bringing today. We want all Canadians of all faiths to be free from this systemic discrimination and this kind of hatred. So
do you believe that the messages that she received today, targeting her as a woman and specifically as a Muslim, represent Islamophobia?
You know what? I think that there's fear on all sides, and there's these kind of hatred statements being made against all faiths. Jewish people, Christian people, Aboriginal people. I think that it's systemic, and I think that we have to do something to change that in Canada for all people of all faiths.
Sheila Malcolmson, this has now become a debate over who has the best motion to fight hate and religious discrimination. A lot of Canadians will look at this and say, why can't you get together and speak with one voice? What's the answer to that?
I'm going to be voting in favour of both the Liberal and the Conservative motion. I can't believe we wasted a whole day of Parliament's time debating what we already voted on last year, which is that we as parliamentarians condemn Islamophobia and we condemn racism, sexism, intolerance in all its forms. It's time for us to actually put those words into action and get down to the work of protecting people, protecting free speech, protecting women who stand up in leadership roles. We've got a lot of work to do.
Mr. Virani, what about that? Sheila Malcolmson saying the NDP, and I heard it from a number of NDP members today, they're going to vote for both motions. Could you vote for the Conservative motion?
I and our government have taken a position that the Conservative motion is weak and it is insufficient to address the problem that we're facing right now. In response to the question you asked, Marilyn, the answer is yes. It is exactly Islamophobia, the kind of abuse that MP Iqra Khalid has been facing. And it goes to the point here, Peter, that when we talk about Islamophobia, a lot of people are saying it's a confusing term. It's not actually confusing. Legitimate questions about a faith, legitimate and honest and open criticism are completely welcome. They're protected by the Charter. I'm a Muslim man. I have those questions about my own faith myself. What is not permitted and what should not be permitted is abuse and hatred that is directed at someone because of the religion that they practice. And the necessity for putting Islamophobia in the motion, Peter, is that in the wake of what happened 3 weeks ago where men were shot down in cold blood in their own mosque because they were worshipping is a problem that we need to identify.
Right, but she proposed the motion before the Quebec mosque shooting.
She very much did, acknowledging the climate of hate and fear, language which is in both the Conservative and the Liberal motion. But that climate demonstrates the need to call this out for exactly what it is. When you have hate crimes diminishing around the country for every single group, but doubling for Muslims, you have a problem. To rectify it, you have to name it for what it is, Islamophobia.
All right, Marilyn Gladu, what's your answer to that?
Well, you know, I think one of the key issues in the debate today was about the definition of Islamophobia, because the committees that were considering this heard that it means different things in different countries. And so, you know, we came to Ms. Khalid and asked for her definition, and she could not provide one. And so I think it's important that when we're approving something and we're going to start taking action on it, that we have a clear definition. And so that's what we're looking for.
But I think she provided a definition on this program a couple of nights ago, an irrational fear of Islam.
Well, you know what, then let me just put some personal perspective
if there was a definition amended, if the motion was amended to include that kind of a definition, could you vote for it?
You know what, I think all the amendments that you're talking about are exactly what we were looking for. I know multiple members of the Conservative Party brought amendments to her, talked about some, you know, putting anti-Muslim instead of Islamophobia, you know, just clearer language, so we'd be open to working with the government to amend.
All right, Sheila Malcolmson, what's your view on that? Is this a debate over semantics, or is there a legitimate argument that Islamophobia can mean different things to different people, and what about the concerns that this motion could, that we've heard from some sectors, could result in a clampdown on free speech?
Free speech is protected in this country. We've had one court case after the next. That's not my fear. But I think people out in our communities are fearful. We're seeing a rise in hate attacks. We're seeing a permission that has been enabled by the election of an American president who was elected on an anti-Muslim platform. We're seeing greater access through social media for people spewing just the most vile statements. And we've got Conservative leadership candidates really fanning the flames and fundraising off this. I'd like to see this House show leadership, take some action. One person's definition inside this chamber really is not going to change life on the street. Let's get down to the committee's work. Let's do everything we can as federal leaders to set the tone and to change the dialogue and let our communities know we'll stand with them, we'll keep them safe. Defining Islamophobia is not going to make any difference. Let's just vote yes and move on with the work.
And Mr. Virani, as Sheila Malcolmson's pointed out, it was in October of last year that the House unanimously passed a motion that was put forward by Tom Mulcair, the leader of the NDP, calling on the House to condemn all forms of Islamophobia. What do you think has changed since then that has some Conservatives reluctant to support this motion now?
I'm actually puzzled, Peter, to be completely honest with you. It's very confusing that the Conservative Party could get behind something unanimously in the House in October, and all of a sudden 4 months later something's changed. What's actually changed in the intervening period is there's been a massacre at a mosque. You would have thought that would have accentuated the problem, causing all parties to come behind this issue and call it what it is. What you see instead are divisions within that very Conservative caucus, and as Sheila rightly pointed out, you have leadership candidates, members of this very House, people who were formerly cabinet ministers for this nation's government, doubling down on this kind of politics of division and actually trying to drum up support on that basis. It's troubling, to say the least. It requires leadership. We're not seeing that from the party opposite with this motion, and what we're trying to do is get behind M103 because that shows the kind of leadership we need.
All right, Marilyn Gladu, what is the answer to why the House unanimously, which means whichever Conservatives, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, whichever Conservatives were in the House on the date in October when that passed unanimously, agreed to have it pass. So what's changed?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, the motion came up and there was not time for a lot of constituent input. We've heard from constituents what their concerns are. Secondly, the motion that's on the table here is now talking about focusing a study specifically on Muslims. And I think that we've talked before about how we don't want to give any one group more focus than another. We do have a problem with many religions in Canada that are experiencing this kind of systemic discrimination, and so that's a key issue as well.
All right, just so the two motions, the Liberal motion, yes, calls on the Heritage Committee to look at a study.
Could I clarify one thing,
yeah.
Peter? It specifically says it requests a study on systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia. So
right.
It is actually inaccurate to portray it as a study about singly one religion.
Right.
But
the Conservative motion talks about the same kind of study, but doesn't specify Islamophobia, the one the House is debating today.
Correct.
Is that a significant difference?
It is a very significant difference, Peter, and what I would again point to is that we've had instances where this Parliament has gotten behind singling out communities that are vulnerable, protecting and calling out discrimination when they see it, championing the causes of groups that are targeted. We've had motions on Yazidis, motions on Egyptian Coptic Christians, motions on Jewish individuals. You just spoke with Irwin Cotler on this very program. It is time now, more than ever, to call out what we are seeing, which is a climate of fear that is directed at Muslim incidents.
Mr. Cotler did say, though, Mr. Virani, that if you removed Islamophobia, you'd have easier support for the motion.
We are firm in our view that in order to address a problem, you need to recognize it, that words matter, and we are firm in the principle that calling this Islamophobia is a necessary and important step.
All right, Marilyn Gladu, quickly again to you. So you're saying that what happened in the intervening number of months since the motion was unanimously passed in the House in October is that members of Parliament on the Conservative side have heard from constituents that don't like it. Is that it?
Absolutely, and I think the word Islamophobia is problematic. Ms. Khalid herself said 98% of the Conservative motion she liked, and that was the only word that was a problem for her.
Okay, Sheila Malcolmson, so it looks like what happens is we'll We'll get this, if I understand the numbers right in the House, we'll probably get a vote on the Conservative motion next week. It will fail because the Liberals will oppose it, and then we'll wait till April before this gets taken up again, right?
And in the meantime, it's incumbent on all of us to reassure constituents, religious leaders, local governments, who are the ones that are really taking the brunt of the racism and vandalism in our communities, that we stand with them, that we will not tolerate sexism, racism, discrimination of any form, and that Canada get on with the work it needs to do with Indigenous people. It's made solemn commitments to actually put good intentions into action. As parliamentarians, we've got a lot of work to do, and debating this in the House all day didn't get us any further ahead.
All right. Well, we'll continue to follow the debate. We'll see what happens with the vote next week, and we thank you for your time tonight. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You heard it.